A couple of weeks ago we did our first questions and answers for YouTube, and it really went down well. People were very responsive and enjoyed it, so we've decided to continue with the series and continue as long as everybody's interested. So this week we've got some questions. We answered lots of questions last week. We had lots of feedback from people. People gave their version on different things, so that was very interactive, which is what we really want. So this week I've got several questions. The first one could be a loaded question. I don't think it is, but it says, how do Japanese saws compare to Western saws? And I don't think there's a quick and easy answer to that. Some will say, well, Japanese saws are better, and some will say Western saws are better. And I think it is a cultural difference. I was raised with Western saws. I use them every day of my life for 50 years. So I've enjoyed using them, and I have fine-tailored the teeth on my saws to particular types of work, and they work really well. But that's because I started off with good training and I've developed it since then. So I think most likely you will be exposed to a particular saw type and you'll continue using that saw. So today a lot of people are introduced to Japanese saws because they do cut very effectively, they're very efficient. I don't think there's any issue with that for me. I think that's whatever works for you is great. There are drawbacks to those saws as there are to Western saws, and you have to discover those for yourself. So they came from UK, they came from Japan, two countries well known, famed for ultra high standards of workmanship. So one was using Western pull saws, the other one was using Western push saws, and the others were using Japanese pull stroke saws, and they both accomplished the high levels that they did, so there's no issue there. The only issue I have is disposability. If I gave you what would be a modern day Western saw today, it would have a plastic handle and it would have cross-cut teeth, and you'd be cross-cutting most of the work with it because it was designed specifically for cross-cutting materials, and I'll get back to that in a minute. The same is true, though, of many Japanese saws, that they are designed for cross-cutting. And if somebody gave you a Japanese saw, say today, say like any one of these, and said, well, these are Japanese saws, somebody in Japan might say, well, those are not typical of the old saws that were before the pre-hardened teeth or the extra hardened teeth and so on. And some might say, well, they didn't have that kind of a back on it, and they didn't have that kind of a handle on it, or whatever. And it's the same with Western saws. If I showed you this saw from 1848 with its beautiful wooden handle and its nice plate and everything, compared to, say, a modern saw with plastic handle, hard point teeth, I would say that's not very typical of a Western saw, but it will become typical because these saws are being outdated and less used. Hopefully we can turn that tide, and people will realize the value of being able to sharpen their saws. And that's a dividing line for me. If I can't sharpen a saw myself, then I don't really use a saw that can't be sharpened. I want something that goes on like this one, 168 years old, still going strong. And I sharpen this about every 2 to 3 months, and I can keep sharpening it. One saw file will sharpen 30 sharpenings. And so in 3 or 4 years, I'll spend £7 on a file, and I'm back to the task. I'm sharpening, and so that's what I want. I want that in all my tools. So generally, I don't buy into the throwaway saws, and that, I'm afraid, is what's become of many Western saws, equally so, or even more so possibly, with Japanese saws. So that's the difference for me. So maybe that will help you, maybe not, but I think that's where it is. So it's not apples for apples. The teeth on cross-cut saws are sharpened for a fleam cut. That's very different. So when you try ripping with it, now look at this, and you'll see maybe a little bit of what I mean. This is plywood. We're all used to it. It's very ubiquitous. You see it everywhere. Plywood has one orientation of grain going this way, and then sub to that, there will be another one going that way. Sub to that will be another going this way, depending on how many plies it has. So about 50% of what you're sawing, your energy is going into rip cut or cross cut. Half goes one way, half goes the other. So the best saw for this is going to be a cross cut saw generally, but rip cuts work on it too. when you pick up things like MDF, this has no grain structure to it as such. It's not like it has long grain for like we use in wood. This is long grain. It goes this way. Most saws are designed to cross cut, especially the plastic handled one, the disposable one. So modern saws will cut that. Modern saws like the cross cut fleam tooth hard point saw is especially good on this stuff. I wouldn't want to use my decent saws on this. I just wouldn't use it because the resins are so hard. And but you can see this is OSB. This is oriented strand board, and it literally means that these bits, thin slithers of wood, are layered like this and compressed and mixed with resins, and it's extremely hard on saws, especially our saws, no matter which type, Western or Asian saws. So this one is especially good, and it's designed for mass manufacturing the same way MDF is and the same way plywood is. All of those products are very hard to plane, and they can be hard to saw. So this is real wood, and real wood, most of the wood that's being used with saws today is cross-cutting for building construction. That's the biggest market for modern day saws regardless, and that's what they're designed for. But for furniture making and general woodworking, different types of woodworking, we often have cross-cut saws in Japanese saws and also in Western saws. I think that answers that question. But I do like both of them, and I'm not knocking either of them. I just use what I can use and sharpen, and that's very important for me. All right, great. That was a great question. Thank you. Question is a YouTube question. How do you straighten the bevel of a chip breaker? Boo. This is what is generally called a chip breaker. It's not technically right because it doesn't break the chips at all. What it does is it diverts the chip. This goes into the plane like this, and when the shaving comes up, it's actually a continuous shaving, even though it does separate. So it's not a chip breaker like you find in a machine where the chips are separated, split off, and then spat out. And that's done because they can't, on a rotary cut, you can't get a continuous shaving. So it rotates. That's the chip breaker, and that may be where this name came from. Originally, on the original Old English planes, Old American planes, whatever, these were called cap irons. This is the lever cap, and then this is the cutting iron or blade. So this guy is saying that he's got this, and it's slightly bent somehow, and when he tries to straighten it, so he's having a problem with it, and I know why. Because if it was bent, say you put this onto something level, let me see if this will help. If you put this onto something level like this, it means he's got a gap on one side, a bit like that. So he's got a gap this side, no gap on this side. So it could have been dropped, broke, bent in some way, caught. So you put it in the vise here, and because it is sprung steel, it's got a little bit of resilience to being straightened or corrected. But if you put it along the nearest line that you can get to the point where it was bent or kinked or whatever, you strike it here, bump, and try not to over tension it the other way, then that will usually take care of it. You can do that. But let me show you something that I've put together to try to explain it a little bit better. Here, I didn't cut the side off this. I cut this off the side for my new book, and it explains a lot of things, just being able to see through the side of the plane. This chip breaker, cap iron, is not twisted and bent, but I put a wedge right in this side here, and I wanted to create an artificial twist in it because I wanted to show you what happens, what the dynamic is with this. This is an amazing addition that Mr. Stanley, I think it was Leonard Bailey, came up with. So you drop this into the mouth of the plane here, and I've created a slight gap on this side which may not be visible to you, but the effect of this lever cap, so even if a cap iron is twisted, you can still compress the forepart down here, down onto the metal, and it takes out that twist. So if I press this lever here, you should be able to see right in here, you should be able to see some compression features, aspects, dynamic, whatever, going on there where it closes up. Watch this now. So if I press this, you can see where the leverage here is pressing down here. And as I press there, I get that closure that I want on that fore edge. So it wouldn't actually matter if it was twisted. So if I lock this down now, I've got this big gap closed up, but it's also closed up right on that fore edge, and that takes care of your problem anyway. So I don't know whether I would sweat it. It's just nice to have your tools in order. If it doesn't beat out with a single blow, then try a second one, and if it just doesn't work, just find another cap iron. That will work too. So great. Moving along here. Let me see what else we had. All right, rust and humidity. Who hasn't had that problem from time to time? And this is a very common, popular question, rust and humidity on the tools. Well, for me, this question is, rust and humidity are significant here in southern Minnesota. Any suggestions? What are your thoughts about wax? Great job, 15,000 views. That was last week. So my answer is easy enough. Another questioner says, what's the experience with waxes for lubricating the plane sole as an alternative to machine oil? What are the trade-offs between the two? Well, my answer really is, if you want a long-term application to the soles of your planes, to the sides of your saws, you might want to consider something called Bow-Shield T9. It's a product made by Boeing, developed by them, to reduce the corrosion on their planes, on the moving parts of the plane, I think even on the wings and body of the plane. This Bow-Shield coats it, and I don't know how long it lasts on a plane, but I think if you did a saw plate or a plane, tools like that, it lasts for about 6 months, depending on how much the application. You can reapply it. It just comes in a small spray can, spray it on, wipe it off, and it leaves a very good quality protective shield on there. And it doesn't transfer, so you don't have a problem with any other problems coming from it. I've lived in Texas and I've been in Louisiana, and you do get problems. We don't have that problem here in the UK because we don't have the heat. So that would be my suggestion. Yes, you can use wax, you can use paste wax, all kinds of waxes. You can, if you didn't want to use the oil. I still prefer the oil. It works. I can just do it so fast. It's so quick. Okay, I was wondering, this is another 4 questions in a row here. I was wondering about oil getting on your wood. Would it not corrupt the surface of for finishing later? Great show, by the way. And another, so does the oil not contaminate the wood? I'd be concerned about causing problems for finish applications. Also, could you use mineral oil? And then another one. Here is a question I have. I'm sure many other woodworkers have regarding oil in the can rag thing. I agree it helps to prevent rust and helps with the smooth movement against wood. Does using your oil can in a rag on woodworking tools get some oil on the wood? And then the next one is basically the same. Let me see, just in case. Any concern about the oil leaving a residue on the surface? So no, we don't have that problem, and I have never had it in 50 years. I've used it on all kinds of finish work, and I've never ever come across a problem with it. What we're really talking about a lot of the time is some people will be concerned about something called silicone, which comes in certain products like furniture polish and so on. And when you want to refinish a surface, you've got wax on that surface, and when you spray, say, a catalyzed lacquer or something like that onto the surface, there may be a little minute particle of silicone in the wax. In most furniture waxes, you'll find silicone, and that causes a crater in the surface called fisheye, and it actually translates into all kinds of surface defects that you don't want. That's not the case with this, and I've never had the oil in the rag cause me any problem in the thousands and thousands of pieces that I have made. So no, I would say yes, there is no problem. All right. Ooh, another question here. You remember the bent handsaws we did a couple of weeks ago when we talked about bending a saw because it got a bend in it? This man is talking, or this person, I don't know if it's a man, is saying that he has a saw where it's got a deliberate kink in it, and when he presses it, it makes a boing sound like flexed metal. And so it sounds as though what's happened is this has become kinked, probably pushing it into the wood with a hard thrust, and it's got caught, and then it had to give somewhere, so it's caused a kink, or somebody's trodden on it usually. And getting those out is almost impossible. It can be done with a skilled hand, you can do it, but it's a lot of work, and I don't generally think it's worth it unless it has some sentimental value or some other value, monetary value. So for me, that's not an easy thing to deal with. And then he says, would it be better for me to cut the entire length of the saw away to make it, and then he says, put a new spine in it. So this sounds like he's talking not about a handsaw, but about a tenon saw. Yes, it could be that the spline itself is causing the problem in that case. And if it is, you simply take the saw first. I would try this first before I did anything else. You take the saw, if it's got the kink is in here, sometimes it has like a buckle in it rather than a kink. And you take the saw this way along the back and you pop it like that, maybe sight it, see if it's still, and then that last one, did you hear that whack on the last one? That meant it was perfectly aligned. That shocks the blade into the pinched steel or brass back, and it usually will almost always straighten the saw. So that may be what the answer is for him. So if it was a kink, yeah, you could cut it off. I've done it myself and it does work, but it's a lot of work, and some steels are just too hard to cut with a hacksaw. So you may have to use some grinding machine to get it down. Okay, on using hand planes. When I use my large hand plane, larger planes for large jobs, I have a bad shoulder that hurts very much with the pushing motion. I always end up pulling them by the front knob instead of pushing. This is much easier for me to do. Are any planes in production made to be used with a pulling action? Actually, you can pull and push the Bailey pattern planes, and I'm going to suggest something here that you may want to reconsider. You could buy an Asian plane. A lot of Asian planes, very well made, can be used with and are used on the pull and the push stroke. But you may want to consider something else. Sharpness is the key to all planing, no matter what. And often we tend to push the limits when it comes to dullness, and we keep using the plane way beyond the period when we should have actually sharpened it 3 hours ago. So my suggestion here, especially if you have a weakness in the body, is to sharpen up more frequently, maybe 3 times as many. Just take the plane iron out, sharpen it, and get back to task. That would be my consideration for that. But yes, you can use pull stroke planes, and the Asian planes are probably the one to turn to, possibly. All right. Hi Paul, I have a couple of questions for one of your Q&A videos. I'm finding it hard to find good quality woodworking chisels and was wondering if there was a particular brand or anything that I should look for in a chisel. First, that's his first question. So we'll take a look at that. Now I've got an ash handled chisel here. This came from Aldi. It's a chisel. It's just one of those mass manufactured chisels. I've reshaped the handle to fit my hand. It feels pretty good. I like ash for a handle, but this chisel, you can see it's a little bit heavier, a little bit clunkier than, say, this one is an Ashley Isles chisel, which I do like very much. You can see it's a lot more slender, I think, and it's more pleasurable to use, I think, I would say. But there are so many chisels these days to choose from. When I first started my apprenticeship, I bought a set of what they call blue chip chisels. Now these are not the identical blue chip chisels you get from Irwin today, because these were made in the UK, and these actually are quite slender. They have some very nice shaped feature to them. I like it very much, and this worked for me for 20 years. These worked for me. I've what do you call it, retired them now, because I want to keep them in usable condition, so I do retire my tools from time to time. But alongside those, I ran some marples, chisels. They could be Sorby chisels, Ward chisels. There are many makers, 300 makers of chisels, or maybe more, in Sheffield alone. And so you can see that these chisels were manufactured for decades and centuries like that. This is a much more refined chisel than, say, even this modern day version of it. But I don't know. I think the plastic, I don't have a problem with plastic handles. I quite like plastic handles. They feel fine, they're well balanced. So I don't think I'd have an issue. But you can pay as little as £2 a chisel. Like these actually cost £2 a piece. If you buy 4, you can buy them for about £8. That's very cheap for a chisel. And I think that is certainly a good introduction level chisel, but it would also last your lifetime, I think, too. These will cost you maybe £30, £25, very nice chisels. It's just a personal preference, and it depends on what you want to buy into. So I think that answers that one. Yeah, chisels at one time were manufactured in domestic to the country you lived in. That's not the case now. Most chisels will be made in probably in China or Taiwan, and the chisels, most of the times I've picked them up have been fine. I've been able to use them just as well as any other chisel. All right, so that was from Corey. Oh, he wants to know also if there is a particular wood species that makes a good handle. Traditionally, ash was probably the most common of all woods used for handles, and beech too is a very popular wood. Boxwood was considered the premium wood of all, and the more knots it had in it, the better the chisel handle, because the knots actually the wood is interactive all the way, and it's got much more movement in the wood inside there, and it resists splitting, so it's wonderful for that. That's what it was known for. And then more recently, you'll get woods like this. Padauk has become a very popular chisel handle wood, and I've beat on this one. I don't maltreat any of my tools, but I've used this with the chisel hammer and never had a problem with it over the last year now, so it's been a great chisel for that. So there are some choices. Oak is another common one. So yeah, that's I think that's probably as many as we can give this time. We'll take a look in another few days and start making another film. Great, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.